when we talk about creativity in and around business, people tend to have one of three views, which is, so creativity, what's it for? Is it for artistic expression? Is it for generating something that actually connects with another human being? Is it about problem solving, if this is option 2? Is it about problem solving, identifying problems and figuring out really good original solutions? Or is it perhaps thirdly, is it about coming up with ideas that are going to drive growth and prosperity? So in no particular order, but Samantha, I'm going to start with you. So what kind of creative person are you? And are you an artist? Are you a problem solver? Or are you a business driver?
I'm definitely the third. I often say when people ask similar questions, I'm like, when you start out as a creative, it's very much you choose whether you're an artist or a commercial creative. And I think in the essence of authenticity, I mean, I'm self-taught. I didn't go to university, so I can't come out and be like, oh, I have this, degree in fine art. And I often say the thing I know about fine art is watching my dad paint the kitchen, and he ran out of paint, so he added water to it, so he didn't have to go down to Bunnings to get some more paint before Mum was looking. So my absolute core of what I do is commercial creative. Our price point is commercial, our message is commercial, and we're about how many people can we reach with this message in a really authentic way.
Right, okay, thank you. Buzz, how about you?
I train as a graphic designer, so I'd like to say that I'm like an artist at my core, but realistically I'm more of a problem solver. So I guess the perspective I can add to this is that I kind of, like you said, know how to code, I know what art is, but I use that to my advantage to kind of solve creative problems using digital mediums. So I think a big part of that is the business need as well. So trying to understand what makes businesses tick, and then using creativity and that sort of artistry to make that sing and kind of make that a competitive advantage for digital companies. But yeah, problem solving is probably at the heart of what I do. Okay, so a slightly different perspective to Samantha's. And Terry, how about you?
And I think I've got all three. And I think that goes to the very heart of creativity, that you need to approach your organisation, whether it be from the artistic side, the business side, production line side, from a creative perspective, and actually pull yourself back from making defined decisions without looking at the obvious aspects. Because I think it's those companies that can be creative from the mail dispatch room, if it still exists, right through to their marketing campaigns. They are the ones that are going to have the edge on companies that don't do that.
So let's just stick with that for a moment. So companies who can be creative from kind of soup to nuts is what you're suggesting. So how has digital technology changed that, or enabled that, or threatened that? And because you have been in and around the marketing and communication space for a long time. So how has that process changed? How are the dynamics inside those businesses changed?
I think it's firstly made it a lot faster. But secondly, I think it has created a difficult interface between the intellectual adopters who understand the theory but don't live the space, and the younger people that actually live the space every minute of the day. And I think the biggest challenge for companies to actually embrace the creativity is to manage the inevitable tension between the senior management that don't get it and the younger people that live it and can create and can do amazing things, but in fact are quite threatening because you don't understand what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And I think the big challenge for companies today is to create a position where their young people can be enabled and taught and trained to be managers without being stymied by people that are making decisions based on their past experiences, which frankly increasingly are less and less valid.
Mm. So Samantha, let me ask you this. So your creative process, you've been building your business for the last 10 11 years. Mm-hmm. So how has your creative process changed as technology has moved on? I mean, we go back 10 years, YouTube was just invented, I think, in about 2003 from memory. So, a lot of the things that we now take for granted weren't really around when you started your business. So how's the process changed?
I definitely think when I started, I had no money, I wasn't travelling like I am now. So as a creative in 2004, it's definitely, or sorry, even over the probably following 3 to 4 years when, before it kind of really kicked in and I had access to a world of travel and, seeing all these different creative processes, I think that it allowed me to kind of tap into things I wouldn't have seen as a creative director. And I think from a production and I guess a logistics point of view, we're using 3D printing now. So when we do our modelling, we don't have to send it to our production house and it gets sent back and then it's wrong. So then I have to go and, it cuts out all this time. It's much more efficient. It cuts out sampling and freighting costs around the world. So it's only a benefit to us.
And what about the actual conceptual process?
Mm-hmm.
So I understand when you get to, say, 3D printing and so you
Yep.
can prototype and test easily, but the actual coming up with the idea, has that changed at all?
I think what it has done, and specifically since Instagram, I say it's a very luxurious time to be a designer or a creative director because and with our followers, they're very engaged. We have nearly 190,000 followers on Instagram and they're gracious enough to show me every day, here's what I'm wearing, here's what I like, I love that colour, or can you do more turquoise? And they're telling me exactly what they want. My most engaged high-spend consumer is telling me exactly what they want me to design for them. And as a commercial business, that's that used to be $50,000 worth of market research a season. So I think, and when people ask me what inspires me, obviously the answers are, travel, and it's all this romanticism around that. But I think at the end of the day, I'm designing specifically for the Samantha Wills woman, and she's gracious enough to talk to me on a daily basis. So it's
and so that feedback loop has got really short, hasn't it?
It's like conversational, like I'm sitting on the couch at night. There was this one, we have a ring that we've done in 144 colours called the Bohemian Bardot ring. It's our signature piece and it's been our top 5 top sellers for the last 6 years. Mm-hmm. And I had this idea one time, I posted a picture of a sunset or something and someone's like, oh, let's tag at Samantha our favourite Bardot colours. And then it's opened this like floodgate of this hashtag Dream Bardot, and we had probably like 900 posts of like, here's what I want the colours to be. And so we just went in to produce them, and they're like, oh great, that's my colour. And it was just like, it was huge for us. So yeah, it's a conversation, and I think specifically women in this day and age, they don't want to be sold to, they want to be part of the conversation, and I think digital has really allowed the creative and the consumer to connect daily.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think in my experience with large companies, that's what you've become obviously a master of is actually very difficult for big companies to do, is field feedback and genuine responses from a marketplace, and then not react, hopefully, but to innovate or iterate off the back of that and change things, change their offering, improve it. That's often really challenging for a large organisation. But if I can just go back to the conceptual piece for a moment, and Buzz, ask you. So you were trained as a graphic designer. That's kind of pencils, rulers, scalpels, sketch pads. Now you're working in a different space. How has technology changed the way that you go about thinking stuff up and finding the solutions?
It hasn't. Not for me anyway. I think being a graphic design student meant about learning what graphic design was. It was about conceptualizing. It was about talking, feedback, pencil, paper, that kind of stuff. And so technology came after that. We didn't learn computers. We didn't learn Photoshop. It was all sort of typesetting and kind of the traditional graphic design. And so now I'm in a digital space. I find that there's a lot of people who kind of get their inspiration from the digital space, or they copy, and there's this whole self-serving industry. Whereas for me, it's kind of nice to look back at problem solving again, which is the conceptualization of something, a fully formed brief, trying to understand why you're doing what you're doing, and then taking the technology element. So I think for me, creativity is still as it was then, and I think that kind of gets a bit distilled nowadays, where especially with digital, there's this assumption that there's this whole new sort of pool of resources and tools that people now use to kind of become inspired, and I don't think that's true. I think, to Samantha's point, there's a lot more inspiration out there. Instagram for one is amazing for that, but it's just another additional sort of element to the creative process, I think.
Mm. And so let me ask, back when I was alluding to the latter part of the 20th century in the noughties, I think there was a view around creativity and creative people that they were often lone wolf geniuses struggling and suffering for their art. Has technology made the creative process a more collaborative process? Is it more inclusive now, or do you think that actually the real driver or catalyst for creativity is still the individual? Terry, you might have a view on this.
Look, in the industry that I work, you collaborate or die, because the reality is agencies cannot have every function, every skill base within their agency because their overheads would just be impossible. So I think we're now seeing a greater level of collaboration than we've ever seen. That is going to continue. And that, by the way, is also a massive threat to them, because ultimately, if they bring in people to collaborate with big ideas and big solutions, ultimately you're confronted with the fact that, well, maybe you don't need them in the middle anymore, that marketers can go direct to the collaborators and do everything themselves. And I think this is what's causing such disruption in our industry, that they can't handle it. They've got to collaborate, but that in itself creates a threat.
But can I just quiz you a bit more on that? So, and it's a while since I was in the advertising business, but kind of really famously and tragically, ad agencies weren't very good at collaborating with, say, media companies. And both of them weren't very good at collaborating with design companies, or at the time specialist digital companies, or even market research companies. There was a bit of a turf war. Have people got better at that, or is it more or less the same?
Have they got good at it? No. Have they got better at it? Yes. Mm-hmm. And of course, like anything, some are much better than others. But the reality is that they have to get better because the market demands they collaborate, because they understand the position that if they don't, then they cannot get what they want within the time frame that they require it. So I still think those turf wars will go on, and sometimes they're within the same agency network and holding company. But fact is, they can't deliver, and if they unless they collaborate, and if they can't deliver, someone else will be found who can deliver. So it's just an inevitable fact of life, and as things progress, I think it will sort itself out. It's just whether they can sort it out fast enough before somebody else comes in to actually say, well, we can do this faster, better, cheaper, easier than you do it.
Mm-hmm. And so let's just take this notion of collaboration kind of to the nth degree. And so, Samantha, you said before, Instagram is a really great tool. You get a lot of feedback, you know kind of what people are looking for, and you're able to respond to that. Would you take that to the point where you just basically crowdsource design? You would kind of go, look, I'll just democratise the whole thing. So I'll just sit here and we'll see what surfaces through that conversation, and whatever they decide we'll make. And in a sense, that's kind of stepping aside from that creative director role and going, no, we'll just let these people collaborate and we'll serve the market through that lens. Is that something that fills you with dread? Do you still think there needs to be a keen eye across this?
Absolutely, that does fill me with dread, firstly. I think what we do is we open it as a forum, and as a creative and as the designer, I'll be like, okay, these are the ideas, or, I know I'm given a matrix at the start of every design season where it's like, okay, here's the commercial holes we need to fill to be a profiting business, and then the top 20% I'm able to then be like, I can design whatever I want and whatever I see the brand moving forward as. So definitely taking elements of it, not handing the keys to the city over to them by any chance. I think at that level, in collaboration between business and consumer, definitely digital has obviously bridged that gap. I think in my industry, collaboration is about database sharing, and there's always one party that is probably more prestigious in the creative process. Someone always drives the creative process, and then someone kind of either gets their name put on it, or it's never, in my industry, I don't think a complete creative collaboration, but it's definitely about tapping into a new database and talking to a new consumer, and I think that's a really great thing.
Mm-hmm. And Buzz, you've got a lot of experience in the software business and actually working inside, so Facebook and Skype and Microsoft and Campaign Monitor. So let's just talk about collaboration from your point of view. Do you think that, are those businesses naturally more collaborative because they have to? And is that a model for other businesses?
I think there's two different types of collaboration. There's one within the company itself. So there's the collaboration between, the engineering and the business teams and the marketing and the sort of the product design teams. So we're actually getting a little bit better at that, I think, as an industry whole. So that's fine. But I think what's the most interesting is the collaboration with the customer. So there's this whole big data thing now, which means that that I actually find a bit terrifying, because that is basically saying, like Samantha was saying, let's crowdsource everything. Let's get an answer for a problem by getting 10,000, 189,000 people to give us their opinions. So I think that crowdsourcing element is what's potentially quite scary about creativity, because it really, like you said, democratizes design, which is not necessarily a good thing. Especially if you're crowdsourcing design, you can't really get anything good out of that, I don't think. But I guess the silver lining to that is that the people who are, genuinely good creative directors will actually come through out of that, and people will start to understand the value of good design.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think this whole, tension between opening up and actually getting feedback in real time and responding to it, as opposed to abdicating your responsibility as a designer or creative person, or just kind of putting judgment aside and just going with the flow. I think that dynamic is pretty interesting. There was a lot of big companies who were very excited about crowdsourcing a few years ago, and it often ended in disappointment or tears. I think when you completely abdicate. But let me ask you another question around sticking with you in software for a moment. So, being a nerd, being a computer software engineer, being a coder, used to be for kind of very linear left-brained thinkers, or at least that was the perception. But now some of the most amazingly cool creative people are choosing to code because it's a form, in their view, of creative expression. So will.i.am from the Black Eyed Peas also happens to be the Director of Creative Innovation at Intel, and was asked recently, they said, what's cooler, music or computer programming? To which he said, easy, coding, by about 10 times. No, hang on, 1 trillion times. It's the most creative space there is. So what's your view around that? Are developers, are coders just basically engineering nerds, or are they creative people?
I think it's a very scary world where we're giving will.i.am a platform to comment on code. But I think what I was going to say earlier about what Terry was saying about this kind of tension between executive and these kind of young creatives is that code and the understanding of code enables you to think of better ways to do something, or new ways, I should say. So I guess understanding what coding is, what it's capable of, what you can do to push the boundaries of whatever problem you're trying to solve, that is what's really interesting. There's still a need, I think, for these old school Hawaiian shirt wearing engineers who don't think very creatively, that just have a very linear path, and we need those. But I think the coding that will.i.am is talking about is an understanding of code, not necessarily the ability to sit and write, the matrix, as it were. So I think we are having to become a bit more creative, and that was essentially why I learned how to code, was to say this thing is done this way currently. Why is it done that way? Is there a way around that? And by understanding the nuts and the bolts, you're able to push it a bit further. And I think that's really cool. Mm-hmm. And from a personal perspective, it's unparalleled gratification to be able to think of something and then build it. Mm-hmm. That's next level stuff.
And Samantha, what about for you? Have the skills that are important in your business, have they changed? And now being any kind of software engineer or coder, is that important now, whereas it wasn't, or is it kind of what's going on with that? Does it matter in your world?
Yeah, it definitely matters. I think, if you're contrasting, like you said, like with music or coding, coding you can create, like what we try and do as a business, we look at ourselves not only as a digital brand, but as a digital retailer. We don't have standalone stores. Our online, we stock through, David Jones and Bloomingdale's and all the big department stores, but our biggest singular channel is our online store, and we're looking at ways of how we can remove, as a digital brand and retailer, remove the screen. So, we do this concept called the Vault, where we send out, as a jewellery company, we make these metal keys with a secret code on them and send them out to our top 1,000 consumers, and then they get to log in at midnight with this code onto the computer and unlock this vault, and it's all, bells and whistles and doors and things. So I think that coding allows you to create that kind of, what every brand is trying to do is kind of not just be completely in a digital world, but how are we reaching beyond the screen and keeping it tangible? And I think that code allows you to be able to do that in the absence of traditional retail.
Great, thank you. And Terry, Cannes celebrates, back in the day, the highest award you could kind of get as a creative person, if you go back maybe 15 years, was to win the Grand Prix in film. The Saturday night, that was the big prize. So anyone who was associated with, say, filmmaking back then, that was the duck's nuts. How has that changed? And And how important is it that the craft of, say, filmmaking or photography or illustration, how does that compare now with, say, the craft of being a digital developer?
I think the reality is still that with film you can create a greater emotional connection. And so if you sit and you watch a great piece of film, it engages you in a different way. And in that sense, that hasn't changed in terms of aspirational desire to win, and I don't think it will change. I think the real issue is the dynamic, because I had a great example this year on my mobile jury, where I had half of the people were mainstream creatives and the other half were technology people. And whilst they all had a creative leaning, the technologists lent far more towards the technology solution, and the creatives looked far more towards the idea. So whilst the creative would be excited by the idea, the storytelling, the technologist would be more excited by the technology itself. And I think that's the most sort of interesting dynamic that's going to exist. And I don't think technology will remove the concept of great storytelling, and I still think, frankly, film is probably the zenith of great storytelling that we all live by, whether it be small screen, middle-sized screen, big screen. It's what we love the most.
So let me just ask a question of the audience here for a second. So who here, who's a creative person here?
By opinion or by profession?
Well, by opinion. Who identifies as a creative person? I'm guessing, about a third of the room. Okay, interesting. So I spent a little bit of time talking about technology and whether being a developer is kind of cool and the new creative or not. But let's suppose that you don't need to be a developer at all. You can just avail yourself of tools that didn't exist before. So, for example, in the world of design, Canva. So I don't know whether any of you are Canva users, but for very little money, you can open an account and start pulling down images, and you can create your own birthday party invitations or posters for your shop or Facebook posts or whatever you like. Whereas once you'd need to go to somebody who would have put their hand up and said, I am a creative person, I'm a designer. I'm just using that as one small example. Canva is now a runaway kind of train in terms of success. So they've got hundreds of thousands of users all over the world and is an Australian invention. Woohoo. So my question is do you need to be a creative person in the same way that you did before? So now you can design things without ever going to design school, although, Samantha, you'll say, well, I'm a self-taught designer.
I'm a fraud.
That's right. So are the skills so important? If you're making music, you perhaps don't have to go and study music or go to music school or production school like you used to, because you can just get started with GarageBand and graduate to Pro Tools and off you go. So what's happening around the introduction of people into creative spaces? Is that just kind of happening now because there's more tools? Or do you think you still have to kind of do the earn your stripes the old-fashioned way?
Me? I definitely don't think you need to earn your stripes the old-fashioned way, and I think that's fantastic. I know it's a very new look, and I think it's frowned upon by a lot of people that probably have, I think it's looked at sometimes that doesn't have a lot of integrity, but I don't think that that's always the case. I think that it's about authenticity at the end of the day, and it's if you love what you do, it doesn't matter how many hours you put in at school or whatever it is. It's what your message and who it resonates with, and I think that that's the most important thing. And everyone who has an Instagram feed is a publisher, they're a creative. So it's all about, I think, personal brand at the end of the day, at the very core of it. So yeah, everyone is a creative.
And you mentioned before that most of your sales are through your web presence, basically. So while you are stocked in some large retailers, it's your distribution is handled more through digital channels now. So, and that's happening a lot, isn't it, around the distribution of music, for example. Try and find a record store, and it's a struggle. Right. Increasingly try and find a bookstore. Is that something that is just inevitable? Is more and more business going to be conducted through digital channels?
I mean, I definitely think it will be. I think that they play hand in hand. When I say, more in our sales, it's probably about 59% online and the rest is retail. But what I think that retail in our industry does is it drives traffic and brand awareness and integrity and, you know, visibility in the marketplace to our online store. So they go hand in hand. I think depending what the product is, music definitely is obviously heading and is very much in that direction. But as a tangible product, I think there always will be a space for retail. As a brand that you know, supplies both, it's very much our responsibility to be empowering them. And you know, I do feel that Australian digital is a little bit behind the rest of the world. So, you know, we have a lot of stores that are doing great revenue, but they might not have an online channel. So, you know, it's our responsibility, as they've supported us, so we now need to support them. And but I definitely do see a place for it moving forward.
And Terry, you've seen, you know, kind of back in the day, the high-end production companies, big media distribution networks were kind of super important. But brands have been born, artists have been born, who have never really availed themselves, had access to those kind of networks, those resources, and have basically managed to surface all the same using digital platforms. So what's your read on this? So is it much easier to distribute your ideas now than ever it was? And are the best ideas the ones that actually come to the top?
I think it's much easier. I don't necessarily say it's always going to be successful, because I think there's also going to be a high failure rate in that space as well. But if you look at China and you look at e-commerce in China, which is absolutely massive and getting stronger and stronger, and then you look at the West, where it's not getting that level of penetration. It's about, and there's some strong companies, but China is almost a way of life. You know, if you don't buy online in China, you're either too rich or have too much time on your hands. And I think that whole e-commerce thing, in fact, I've read in the last 24 hours 2 companies that are setting targets of e-commerce, which are brands direct. So this is going to be a really interesting positioning where big FMCGs are now pushing to try and get e-commerce direct with the brand, whilst at the same time having a large retail presence. So I think we're going to see a lot of conflict occurring and a lot of management process occurring about how you can take your sales from 1 billion e-commerce to 5 billion e-commerce without upsetting greatly a large number of customers all over the world. And that's just inevitable that that's going to continue for a while. And the reason I say for a while is because you don't know what's around the corner. So although I think that there's going to be a massive sort of impact, there could the potential another massive impact around the corner that could alter it all over again. And I think that's probably the most interesting thing about this revolution, that it is so dynamic, so fast changing than any other revolution we've ever had in history.
And so in that example, the middleman's getting cut out, right? So the middleman in that case is a kind of a traditional retailer, as big companies just go direct to the consumer. That seems to be happening quite a lot. And I've got a question at the end of this for you, Buzz. So, you know, we all know Airbnb is the world's largest hotel company, doesn't have any fixed assets, doesn't own a single hotel room. Uber, world's largest taxi company, doesn't own a single vehicle. And that model seems to be repeated again and again. And there's a view that really the future is just all about software, and there's only 2 kinds of companies. Ones that know they're software companies and ones that don't know they're software companies. What's your view around that, Buzz? And do you see that as a creative opportunity in a lot of industries?
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing for me is what Samantha was saying about removing the screen from the customer. Is I don't think technology is necessarily replacing, you know, the traditional means, but it is definitely blurring the lines a bit. And I think that's what's important for creatives to understand, is that it's our job to kind of make sure that people are moving away from their smartphones and their tablets and TVs and websites and whatnot into the real world. But I think, to answer your question, like, technology and software is sort of the golden thread which ties it all together. So I think it's a really interesting time because of the Airbnbs and the Ubers and whatever else, because, you know, technology enables us to take something physical and real and then connect it in a much, much quicker and real time and more relevant way. And I think that's where the sort of the new sort of younger designers can kind of help us out here with their ability to code and whatnot, because it helps us to understand how we can make real world experiences a bit more relevant.
So for those of you sitting there who might be thinking, oh, this panel's kind of bits of it are interesting, but Craig keeps dragging everyone onto software. And I just want to point something out. So last week, the Global Agenda Council for Software and Society, itself a really interesting title, so it's part of the World Economic Forum, released a report, and they had 800 experts contribute to this report from all over the world. And really it was about when particular technology shifts are going to hit mainstream society. So 800 experts all over the world going, what's going to hit mainstream life experience anytime soon? And they said that by 2025, 10% of the vehicles on the road will be driverless. We will have a robotic pharmacist by 2025. So when you walk into your chemist, you'll be greeted by an android-y kind of machine thing that will, process your prescription. You'll have an implanted mobile device. I've got an iPhone 6 Plus. I don't know where they're going to implant that. Obviously, they're going to have to get a whole lot smaller. There'll be artificial intelligence will be on a board of directors. So when you think about 2025, as a kid, that was like so far off. That's 10 years away. It's not very far. And a lot of the jobs that we now kind of take almost for granted are going to be replaced by software. So my question is this. So how do you prepare for that kind of seismic change? And how ready, in your view, is Australia? Terry?
I don't think you actually ever do prepare for that sort of seismic change. You sort of know it's coming, it's theory, but the number of people that can actively address it, I think, is limited. I think Australia is as well placed as any country because, above all, whilst bandwidth and technology issues are an issue, I think the biggest issue is people, the ability of people, because Airbnb wouldn't exist except for the consumer likes it. Uber wouldn't exist except the consumer likes it. So I think if the people are receptive and ready and open, then you'll be in a good space. And I think that's one thing that Australia does pretty well. I think it is receptive to new technology, new thinking, and very open.
Samantha, what about you? So in a world which is changing just so rapidly and in a very profound way, are you kind of contemplating any of that inside your business?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what the biggest thing, and my business partner says this to a lot, is like be brave and try things, and if they don't work, in digital, you can take it down straight away. And I think that the word innovation is overused so much, but I think it's about being brave and about being first to market and seeing what your consumer resonates with, and almost like taking them on that journey with you, not just kind of coming out one day and be like, we're a complete tech company now, and we've been working on this behind the scenes for the last 12 months, but ensuring that communication is along the way and seeing what they're resonating with, but also like almost drip feeding it to them so that you don't lose them along the process of that journey. So it's not about planning 10 or 20 years in advance. It's kind of just like continually evolving and not staying stagnant.
And Buzz, what about you? So you were born in the UK, you spent a lot of your working life in the UK, you're now a resident and a citizen of Australia, but what's your view about Australia's level of preparedness for this kind of level of change?
I think the bandwidth issues, though hilarious, aren't actually a big deal. I think what's actually interesting is if you read sort of Business Insider, every couple of days there's an article about how Australia are the underdogs, and I think Silicon Valley has just, recently started to sort of realise that we're very sort of can-do people, and I think that sort of traverses into the software field as well, where you see sort of Canva, Atlassian, Campaign Monitor, these companies, try and adapt to a marketplace, they fail fast, they become profitable, and then they hit the world stage, which I think is really interesting. I think that's definitely unique to Australia. That's, I think, what's going to help this industry boom.
So actually, both you and Samantha have touched on speed. So you said you can experiment, and if they don't work, they're just pixels, you can take them away, and you're talking about failing fast. So Jason Jennings, the writer, has got a really great quote. He says, "It's not the big that eat the small, it's the fast that eat the slow." So how do you recommend that we deal with this need for speed? How as an organisation or as a creative person, do you cope with that? Buzz?
I'm not sure you can. I think not jumping on the bandwagon's probably quite a big one for me. I spend a lot of time on the sidelines just trying to watch what's happening. I guess being fast means that you're ready to kind of jump on the next thing, which is actually becoming a trend. But I think people who kind of just jump onto the next big thing, that's what's going to cause you to fail quite often. But yeah, I think just this ability to kind of watch what's happening in the technology space and sort of react to it, that's tough, and it can cost people businesses.
And Samantha, beyond just experimenting a lot, is there any other kind of strategy that you can adopt in this world that is moving so quickly? And you're in the fashion world. I mean, the fashion world is by definition fickle. Nothing really lasts in that world. So,
Right.
so how do you do that, and how do you do it faster and faster?
I think taking educated risks, definitely. Like, you definitely have to throw something at the wall and see if it sticks, but in an educated way. I think also what Terry was saying before, like having an open door policy. Like, we have a young female team. Like, our youngest is probably 19 in there, and traditionally the intern wouldn't get a say at the boardroom table. It's very much an open door policy because they're the ones that are in the thick of it and seeing so much more than, I'm 33 years old. I don't consider myself a dinosaur by any means, but these guys are coming in with all these great ideas, and it could be like the easiest thing. So I think, just listening to younger people and giving them the time to give their opinion is really important.
So thank you. That's the perfect segue for my question for Terry. So Terry, you touched on this earlier, and you were talking about how young people in the industry that you know well often kind of get it and want to get on with it, and it's often the more senior people in leadership positions who don't get it so much and in a sense are a bit of a roadblock. And people talk about digital natives and digital immigrants. But I've got 3 kids. The youngest is 13, and then I've got a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old. And I can see, so they're all digitally native, but I can see the 13-year-old's level of digital dexterity is kind of well in advance of her older brother and sister. So it's happening really, really quickly. So what would you, Australia, the average age is 37, 38. So any thoughts on how we might possibly address this as either, opportunity, threat, reality, however you want to frame it?
I think it's education. I think there are a lot of companies that actually have the desire to be innovative, to create change, but actually don't quite know how to do it. And even smart companies, you see them going in, they know they've got to be in the space, but they don't quite know the right way to get to the space. So I think there's got to be a significantly conscious attempt to bridge the interface as opposed to just letting it happen. The time of just, well, it'll work itself out isn't around. I think you've now got to have a focus of, and I'm not going to say HR because I think that's not where it belongs. I think you've got to have a very specific focus on trying to bring the two groups together, greater levels of understanding, so that in fact both can win here. Because at the end of the day, the young people who are fast, nimble, mobile, their experience in managing issues and other people isn't great. So each have a very good contributing part, but the fact is they've got to be able to talk and communicate and understand really what they're trying to achieve. And I think that's the only way it can happen at all, frankly.
Okay, so just, I know we're running out of time, so I just want to ask you each one more question. So I imagine that some of you have seen the film Her, where the main character falls in love with the operating system, played by Scarlett Johansson from memory. And some of you may have seen Ex Machina, which is a film about the rise of artificial intelligence. And you might even have read a bit of Raymond Kurzweil about the singularity and the point at which computers become smarter than people, and that's rumoured to be about 2030, so not too far away. Imagine you're, Terry, I know you've got grown-up kids, and you're probably not going to have any more, but imagine that you were, and you had the opportunity to choose one talent for your child that could be implanted, at birth. Number one, would you elect to do that? And number two, if the answer was yes, what talent would you choose?
I probably wouldn't elect to do it, but I think if I did elect to do it, I think humanity. I would like my kids to have real humanity.
Great, that's a really good answer. Samantha, how about you?
I think I would choose as a gift, I mean, that is a lovely thing to say. Mine's not as lovely. I would choose anticipation. I think that there's real value in foresight and really being able to read a problem, and it's something that I'm personally trying to get a lot better at and understand people more. But the anticipation of, whether problem solving, life, people. Yeah, so I think anticipation.
Right, brilliant, thank you. And Buzz?
Yeah, I think creative problem solving is something which is going to become more of an issue, I think, when the machines take over. It's a very human thing to be able to think of a multitude of different ways around a problem, and that's something to be nurtured for sure, because machines can't readily replicate that, at least not until they take over.
All right, thank you. Well, look, I'd love to keep talking, but we can't. But thank you very much. Terry, thank you. Samantha, Buzz, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.